Oh, sorry about that. We've just had a technical failure. I've switched to the phone. So, good evening if you're still there. My apologies for the technical issues. My name's Andy Crook and I'm your host for tonight's training on labour rates. My mission is to help garage owners become more successful in business. Now, I know this topic is of some interest because it always creates a lot of debate. Because there are lots of ways of calculating or setting your labour rate. And we're going to look at just one tonight. And we're going to look at the implications that may have for your business. So what are the other ways, other than the one we're going to talk about tonight, which is the basic formula that I use and that I suggest other business owners use based on your costs, your fixed costs. And then what else we can look at? We can look at differentiated labour rates, different labour rates for different services you provide. And we're going to ask the question, are they confusing or do you already use them? We'll have a look at a bit of the good and the bad and the ugly of that. And then we'll look at dealing with inflation, price increases, and how we add value. That's the topics for tonight. So we'll start with the methods of calculating or setting your labour rate. Now, when I talk to people about this, one of the things that I often hear is that they base their labour rate on what's happening around them, the local conditions, if you like, and they look at what their competitors and other garages are charging, and that sort of biases what they're going to charge. So if they feel they're slightly better than average, they might put their labour rate slightly above what the average is locally or what other people are charging. Or they might set their labour rate to try and attract customers as almost like a loss leader. And that's very tempting if you're a new business, is to set your labour rate lower to attract the business. But I urge you not to. I urge you to follow the formula that we're going to talk about. Another thing I hear people say is it's all people will pay. I can't put them up any higher. And this artificial glass ceiling on labour rate is holding a lot of businesses back, and it stops them becoming profitable. So what makes people feel that is maybe based on some things that are maybe they need to deal with either themselves personally or within their business in terms of setting their labour rate. Because what you should be doing is you should be calculating your labour rate based on your figures. And the basic formula I have is your labour rate is equal to your fixed costs divided by your hours worked multiplied by the profit required. I'll say that again. So your labour rate is equal to your fixed costs divided by your hours worked multiplied by your profit required as a percentage. And I'll go through that and how that works out just now, because I'll go through a worked example so it makes a bit of sense. So because obviously all of these are recorded, you can watch it back, you can kind of do the maths. Don't try and do it live with me, but you can do the maths when you watch it back. So your fixed costs are, and we've done a training on fixed costs, so if you don't know what your fixed costs are, look at that training to work them out. And your fixed costs are now different accounting software packages and different garage management systems may give you a slightly different fixed costs, because some include wages and salaries, some don't. But your fixed costs in this case, what that needs to do is needs to include the wages and salaries of your staff. So if your particular accounting software or your garage management system that you use to calculate these numbers from doesn't include them in your fixed costs, there are reasons why it can and it can't. Too complicated to go in here now. Make sure your wages and your salaries are included in your fixed costs. And then you're going to divide that number by the number of hours worked. Now you can do that weekly, monthly, annually. It doesn't matter. You'll end up with the same number at the end, as long as you're looking at the fixed costs over the same period as the hours worked. So we're going to do it in the example weekly. So then what we're going to do is we're going to multiply that by what profit you want. Now that is important, because when we cover this in a little bit more detail as we go through the example, we'll explain the profit bit a little bit more then. But typically you want a profit margin, or the profit required, of either somewhere between 5 and 20%. Now you can have more. There's nothing stopping you. In fact, the more the better, as far as I'm concerned, but there is a limit. And it's based on that stuff that we talked about at the beginning. your competition, the pricing structures locally, you know, your, if you like, the climate around you in terms of the financial climate in your local area. Is it an affluent area? Is it not so affluent? That these will dictate where the maximum profit you can probably add on to your labour rate. So when it looks at the hours worked, what you need to take into account of is the number of hours you work per week and the number of weeks you work per year. So take into account holidays, take into account any closures, and get the number of weeks and hours worked as an average, either for the year or for the period you're going to calculate it on. So for us, it's our weekly average. And remember, that's the number of hours you would work times by the number of techs. So that's the number of productive people working in the workshop, multiplied by your efficiency. So you need to know those numbers. If you don't know the efficiency, you can get a good idea if you're just starting out and you want to work out where to set it and you haven't got these figures. The efficiency for a typical independent garage is somewhere between 50 and 75%. So if you use 62.5, halfway between those two things, it'll put you in the ballpark. But remember, if you want to improve your profit, you can improve your efficiency. It's as simple as that. If you want to improve your profit, once you've done this calculation, reduce your fixed costs. Don't go penny pinching, don't cut quality, cut cost. So that's basically where we're at. So we've got our fixed costs, we've got our hours worked. Hours worked is based on the number of hours we work in a given period, which is typically a 40-hour week if we start there, multiplied by the number of techs, multiplied by the efficiency. Remember to take into account in that average the holidays and everything else, right? I've got a spreadsheet on this that we use in the Atomic Success Program, but if you just want to see if your current labour rate is covering your costs, this will do it. And then what you need to do is, once you've got that number, is multiply it by the profit you want to extract. Now, I see a lot of labour rate calculators and they don't add the profit bit, and I can understand that. But in my opinion, we want to make a profit. And that's just my opinion. That's just the way I do it. So in this example, we've got a business. It's got fixed costs of around about £360,000 a year. And we've broken that down to just under £7,000. That comes down to per week. So £6,923 per week of fixed costs. And they work on average 100 hours per week. And that's that's 4 technicians times 40, 160, multiplied by the efficiency, 62.5, comes out at 100. The reason I've done that is to make the maths nice and simple. So their hourly rate before profit is 69.23. That's what their hourly rate should be. Now, if they want to have a 10% profit, they need to take that number and multiply it by 1.1. That'll give you 10%. And their labour rate then comes out at 76.15 plus VAT. So if you add the VAT onto that, their labour rate is 91.38. And that will cover all of their fixed costs and provide a small profit of around about 10%. As long as they do have an efficiency of 62.5 and they are working those 100 hours between those 4 techs every week. Which is interesting because that number is probably quite high compared to what a lot of people are charging. So the average in the UK, and there's been some stuff come out online recently. I think Garage Hive have set up some information for independent garages that's looked at exactly this. So the timing for this actual video is pretty good. But the UK average, last time it was put up anywhere, I think the Independent Garage Association did something a couple of years ago, and they come up, it's around about £52.50, something like that. And it does vary region to region because the local economies do influence it. So it could be far more in the southeast than it is in, say, in South Wales. It's just the way it is. Our local economies are slightly different. But I'm going to guess most people are charging somewhere between £50 and £65. And so if you are charging £65, this fictitious garage, because that's what roughly it should be, plus VAT, that's 78 quid an hour. They're they're a way bit off, aren't they? Between 91.38 and 78 quid means that business isn't covering its fixed costs with the one thing that it's in control of, which is its labour. So that business is probably only surviving, if it is, or only making a profit based on the parts it sells. And we want to try and step away from that as independent garages. Now, it's going to be difficult, and we're going to get to that in a second, how we jump from maybe where your current labour rates are and where they need to be to cover your fixed costs, because it's often quite a big gap. I mean, the gap there, it's sizable, isn't it? It's £12-13 an hour, and that might be difficult to put up with all in one go. So the next question, now we've got the basic formula, which is, I'll say it again, your labour rate should be based on your fixed costs divided by the number of hours worked multiplied by a small profit. That's it. Simple as that. So what about differentiated labour rates then? Should we have the same labour rate for everything? Should we just have a labour rate? Or can we and should we have a labour rate for our diagnostic services, our aircon services, and our MOT? Well, if you do MOTs, you already have a different labour rate for your MOT. It'd be very unusual if your labour rate was based on your MOT fee. It may be. The average MOT, was it take about 3/4 of an hour? Let's use that as an example. So the MOT is 54.85, which meant if you divide that by 0.75, that's 73 quid, per hour. That's what the government reckons an independent garage that offers some sort of specialist service should be charging for its labour, because that's basically what they've set it at. But they set that 12 years ago. So if we were £65 plus VAT, which was 78 quid, the MOT is 73 quid plus VAT, because there's no VAT on the MOT. So, but we would have to charge VAT for our labour because that's not VAT exempt. So that's interesting, isn't it? So are they confusing? Well, I don't think they are. I think different services should attract a different fee, but that's down to the individual business owner to work out. We already have, if you do MOTs in your business, differentiated labour rates based on the service that you offer. So services that require high levels of skill and high levels of investment in tech and equipment should attract a higher labour rate. That higher labour rate allows you to reinvest in the business to make sure you have the latest equipment, information systems, etc. to do that job. That's what it's for. That's the labour rate, covers your fixed costs plus a small profit. If the fixed costs for doing a certain type of work are higher, then why not charge more? You can work it out by breaking out different costs for different jobs, the cost of doing business for each individual item if you wanted to, but that's up to you. It's one way of looking at it. I don't think differentiated labour rates are a bad idea. In fact, I think they're essential. So, hot topic at the moment, inflation. So inflation has resulted in price increases to the cost that we're incurring. Energy, maybe your rent, water rates, gas, electric, all of that stuff going up, which means ultimately you have to pass that cost on to your customers. So we're going to have to look at price increases for our services as well as our goods. But if you add an increase in price, do you need to add value? I'd argue you do. However, there's a quid pro quo, if you like, here. Whereas if the cost to you is higher, then the cost to your customers should be higher. So how do you pass that cost on? How do you deal with inflation within your business? I've done some training on something called net present value, which basically states that a quid in your pocket today is worth less tomorrow. So a pound in your pocket today isn't worth a pound tomorrow due to inflation. The average inflation rate in the UK over the last 10 years or so has been about 2.6%. We as a business put our prices up by around about 3% every year, which basically means that if you did the same thing for the MOT, if you did exactly the same thing for the MOT, you put it up by the inflation rate, the same MOT fee, which is 54.85, would be 73 quid now. Wouldn't mind that, wouldn't you? Imagine doing MOTs for 73 quid. But that's what inflation has done to the MOT price. What it means is that back in 2010, when the fee went up, that 54.85 represents £73 today. That's the difference. So in effect, the government not putting it up is costing you more money. So how do you deal with inflation? You can either put it up bit by bit, incrementally every year, or you can deal with inflation by putting it up by a big amount when you start feeling the pinch. I know what I'd rather do. I know what customers are more comfortable with, but it's your decision. So if you do end up putting it up by a big amount, a big jump, because you haven't kept up with inflation, because inflation was relatively low at 2.6%, you are going to have to add value to what you do, because you can't just put it up by that amount and the customers go, well, what's different? Nothing. Or well, my prices have gone up, so your prices have gone up. The customers are not going to wear it so much. You're going to have to add some value. It always has to be a fair exchange. So you've got to think about how you set your labour rate so that it covers your costs, because that's the only thing we're in control of within our business. We want the profit on the parts that we sell to be the cream, if you like, within the independent garage. Too many independent garages are surviving purely on, maybe not even surviving, on their parts profit. We need to cover our costs with our labour rate plus a small amount, and then as the business, we should be making money on the shop, if you like, part of the business. Gone a little bit over due to the technical difficulties at the beginning. Sorry for that. Hope you've enjoyed and you've taken something from it. If that's been of some interest and it's made you guys think about what you do in your business in terms of setting your labour rates, how you're going to deal with inflation, whether or not you should have differentiated pricing, then I've done my job. If you want to know more about the Atomic Success Programme, send me a message on Facebook Messenger and I'll get back to you, and we can have a chat, get on a call and see if it's the right for you and you are willing to jump on the programme. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for watching. Good night and a safe night. Cheers, guys.